let's dive into the story of Noach. Noach is told to take animals into the teva. We need it. God wants all the species of the world to survive, the human species, but also all of the animal kingdom. As if he tells him, take 2 of every non-kosher animal, like that they can mate afterwards, and repopulate the world. Oh, here's Stephanie. And then after that, he says, out of every kosher animal, you should take 7. The reason for that, by the way, is because Noach brought sacrifices afterwards. Okay, let's see this in the Torah. Oh, look, here we go. This is what I was supposed to show while I was giving you the introduction. Okay, but text 1a is God giving Noach these instructions for him to take of each animal. Arnold, you want to get us started?
Yeah, and God said to Noah, come into the ark, and you and all of your household, for it is you that I have seen as a righteous man before me in this generation. Of all the pure animals, you shall take for yourself 7 pairs, a male and a mate, and of the animals that are not pure, 2, a male and its mate. Also of the fowl of the heavens, 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive on the face of the earth.
Thank you. Okay, pure and impure animals, right? What are pure and impure animals? So Rashi, of course, immediately explains for us. Arnold?
Of all the pure animals that are destined to be clean for Israel, we learn from here that Noah studied the Torah.
So it turns out that just like we learned about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they studied the entire Torah even before it was given. Similarly, Noah studied. Come again?
How could that have happened?
So this has a lot to do with the fact. This is a very good question, Marilyn, and I don't want to get into this topic too much here because it really is going to be irrelevant to our class. But let me answer your question. The Torah actually precedes the world. You may have heard this before. That the way that God created the world was by looking into the Torah, which he already had, and then created the world based on the Torah.
It's a blueprint.
It's like a blueprint for the world. And this is a very, very interesting point because we assume that the Torah only comes into the world once the Torah is revealed to the world in the year 2248. But actually, the Torah precedes the world, and God created the world in order for the Torah to be kept. So therefore, and by the way, this has its own powerful lesson in and of itself, as a by-the-by, which is that whenever we feel like there's something in the world that is too difficult, like something in the physical world is making it difficult for us to keep the Torah. So let's say I want to keep Shabbos, but I feel like the world is not allowing me to keep Shabbos because the world forces me to work on Shabbos because of the norms of the world, whatever it is. We would do well to remind ourselves that everything in the world is really preceded by the Torah, and the Torah is the blueprint for the world, okay? This is directly from the Medrash, by the way, that God created the world by looking at the Torah. But more importantly, God left the Torah accessible only for those that were involved in the spiritual realm, that were willing to pursue it, etc. What happened at Mount Sinai is that God then took that Torah, which pre-existed the world, and brought it down into the world and gave it to the Jewish people. Which is why you have lots of people that are upset about that move. There's the angels, for instance, that are upset about that move, because they had been studying the Torah all the time beforehand, and now God is giving it to the Jewish people, all this sort of thing. Marilyn, does that answer your question at least?
Yeah, I'm just curious what Noah thought when he read about himself in the Torah.
Absolutely, that's a very good question. And he knew the end of the story, so I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe the parts about himself were hidden from him. I don't know. I never thought about it from that perspective. That's a very good question. But in any event, so what does it mean? HaTahora, the Eis Asher Einena Tahora, the tahor animal, the pure animal, and the animal that is not pure, it's referring to the animals that are going to be kosher and unkosher, as right kosher and treif as we know them. Arnold, you want to finish reading for us?
Of all the pure animals,
that
are destined to be clean for Israel, we learn from here that Noah studied the Torah, 7 pairs, so that he might offer up some as sacrifice upon leaving the ark.
Okay, great. Now, so that's the verse and that's the Rashi. What I want to talk about is the phraseology of the term the Eis Asher Einena Tahora.
Which means?
I'm just going to mute the person that had some background noise. So, which means, God says, of the animal which is not pure, okay? So the word for pure in Hebrew is tahor. The word for impure in Hebrew is tameh. You may have heard these words before. But God doesn't say the pure animals and the impure animals. When it comes to taking 2 by 2 of the non-kosher animals, of the impure animals, it doesn't say impure. It says the ones that are not pure. Those that are not pure, which I find very fascinating. And that is a very, very strange terminology. Okay? Now, just by way of example, and Marilyn, maybe you can read for us here. Text 2 is an excerpt from Parashat Shimini. Okay, Parashat Shimini is where we discuss all of the laws of the kosher and non-kosher animals. Okay, the Torah specifically uses the word tameh, not the word impure. So whenever the Torah wants to talk about animals that are not pure, there's a word for it, tameh, impure. Go ahead, Marilyn. Let's see this.
Because these you shall not eat among those that bring up the cud and those that have a cloven hoof. The camel, because it brings up its cud, but it does not have a completely cloven hoof, is unclean for you. And the hyrax, because it brings up its cud, but will not have a completely cloven hoof, it is unclean for you. And the hare, because it brings up its cud, but does not have a completely cloven hoof, it is unclean for you.
Okay, thank you. So now the question becomes, we know that the Torah is very specific in every word that there is in the Torah. And by the way, I'm going to give you an example of this in a minute, okay? Meaning before you start jumping on me like, oh, you're just splitting hairs on a letter or a word, whatever it is. The Torah is very exact about every single word that the Torah says. Let's see this by way of example. Oh, sorry. And the pig, because
it has a cloven hoof that is completely split, but will not regurgitate its cud. It is unclean for you.
Okay, that word unclean or impure, I don't know why they translated it as unclean. I guess impure would be a better translation. That's the word we're looking for, tameh. But yet, in Parashat Noach, that's not the word that's used. Okay? Now, just to be clear, every single word in the Torah is extremely exact. Look at this story from the Talmud. Go ahead, Phil. You want to read for us text 3?
Rev Yehuda said in the name of Rav, when Moses ascended on high, he found the Holy One, blessed be he, sitting and tying crowns on the letters of the Torah. Moses said before him, Master of the universe, who is preventing you from giving the Torah without these additions? God replied, there is a man who is destined to be born after several generations, and Akiva ben Yosef is his name.
The famous Rabbi Akiva.
Yeah.
He is destined to derive from each and every thorn of these crowns mounds upon mounds of halachot.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Does everybody know thank you, Phil. Does everybody know what a crown is? On a letter, a crown of a letter in the Torah? If you've ever looked inside a Torah scroll.
Well, it shows something like a regular crown that we know of on a royal person.
Right. So whatever. I mean, that's like it's a euphemistic word. It's a figurative word. It's sometimes you'll have a bet or a lamed, and there will be kind of like these 3 strokes. Very good. Marilyn is making it like 3 or 4 fingers almost, like strokes coming up from the top of it, kind of crowning the letter. Okay. Yeah. And that's what we call the crowns of the letters. Now, they're very specific in the Torah. There's a tradition of exactly which letters are supposed to have and which ones not. It's not always a beis and it's not always a lamed. Sometimes a lamed will have it and sometimes not, and sometimes a bet will have it and sometimes not. And it depends on where it is and how it is, and there's a list of them that's been passed down since Moses at Sinai, like every other part of the Torah. Great, beautiful. So when Moses saw God writing the Torah for the first time, Moses said, whoa, come on, you got to be kidding me. Not only is every letter exact, but every crown is exact. So God told him, yes, not only that, they're going to learn something out of every single crown, because every single one of them is going to be exact. There's going to be a man, his name was Rabbi Akiva, and he was pretty famous for this exegesis, they call it. Learning out something from these little crowns. So certainly the letters and the words and the phraseology of the Torah is extremely exact. So here's my question. Why would the Torah in Parashat Noach avoid using the shorter word tameh or tmeya, ha-tmeya, the impure animals, the unclean animals, the non-kosher animals? Instead, it uses the term, and those animals which are not pure.
Yeah.
Instead of using the word tameh, the Torah uses the which I guess would mean tainted or defiled. I don't know what the proper word for tameh is, but either way, instead the Torah uses the word those that are not tahor, those that are not pure, and that's the question here.
Right.
Okay. All right. So the Talmud addresses this. Stephanie, can you read for us? Stephanie, you got to unmute yourself. We can't hear you. I don't know if she's there. Stephanie, can you hear us? Oh, there she is. Go ahead.
I'm driving. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Well, then please don't read for us.
I didn't tell you. Okay, I'm driving.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Please don't read for us while you're driving.
Okay.
But Arnold, why don't you read for us the Talmud? Go ahead.
As Rabbi Yehuda ben Levi said, a person should never express a crude matter as a formulation of a verse as the formulation of a verse was distorted by the addition of 8 letters rather than expressing a crude matter, as it is stated, of all the pure animals and of the animals that are not pure. I did not understand any of that.
Thank you. Says Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, a person should never let negative words exit their mouth. Don't use negative terminology. Don't say things with a negative vibe to them. Don't use, crude language. Okay? Where does he get this from? He says, you know why? Because the Torah teaches us in Parashat Noach, when God wants to talk about the non-kosher animals, he calls them those animals that are not pure. Instead of labeling them tameh, he just calls them not pure in this soft way. Instead of saying the word tameh, he says, and those animals that are not pure. And he says, the Torah distorted. In other words, the Torah added 8 letters. By the way, let me just remind you guys know this, but every single letter in the Torah is exact.
Right.
If a Torah is missing one letter, or even a letter is only split, let's say you have a chet, and the chet has a crack down the middle, so it looks like a vav and a zayin, or 2 zayins. That entire Torah is invalid, is puzzle. So every single letter in the Torah is extremely careful. And here we have not 1 letter, but 8 letters. Instead of saying, ha behema, ha timeya, the animal which is unclean, instead the Torah says, and the animals that are not pure. Which if you count the letters, instead of ha timeya, which is 5 letters, asher einena tahora is 13 letters.
That's where the extra eight letters come from. Okay.
Exactly.
I wish President Trump were invited to this talk.
I agree with you, Phil. It's true. But it's not just President Trump, it's many people. I wish that half the late night TV show hosts knew about this. I wish that, whatever, there's a lot of disgusting stuff out there. I wish a lot more people had a lot more class and ability to talk properly. Anyways, but for now, let's keep it away from politics. Oh, look who wants to say goodnight to everybody.
Oh.
What? What happened? Oh, yeah. Okay, Menachem, come here. They can't see you.
Hi, Menachem.
Say hi, everybody.
Hi.
Say
Good
hi.
night.
Say good night, Marilyn.
Good night, Marilyn.
Night, Menachem.
Say good night, Arnold.
Good night, Arnold.
Good night, Menachem.
Say good night, Phil.
Good night, Phil.
Good night, Menachem.
Say good night, Stephanie.
Good night, Stephanie.
Should we tell them what we did on Monday? Should we tell them? On Monday, Menachem went to go take a bath, and Tati came out here to teach the class. It was Faith and Trust in God that night. So some of you were there, not everybody. And Tati said that Menachem can come say goodnight to everybody when he comes out of the bath. But it was a short class, and it was even shorter than we imagined, and his bath was longer than we imagined. And by the time Tati was done his class, Tati came out and Menachem was already done his bath. And Menachem was very sad that he couldn't say goodnight to everybody, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
You know what we did?
Too.
Let's tell them. We did a silly thing. We just FaceTimed Menachem's Bubby in New York, Bubby Rifkin. And Bubby Rifkin and Zadie Rifkin were standing on the other side of the camera. And what did you do to Bubby Rifkin?
Good night.
Yeah, we said, good night, Steve. to Zaidi. And what did Zaidi say?
Not Steve.
Zaidi said, I'm not Steve. And Billy said, good night, Stephanie, to Bubby, right? And what did Bubby say?
Stephanie.
Bubby said, I'm not Stephanie. And it was very, very silly and very, very funny, right? Yeah, it was. Okay.
Very
Good night, Menachem. I love you so much. Mwah. Say good night to Bina, because she's sleeping right here, see? Give her a kush. A little kush so she doesn't wake up. So she fell asleep in my arms. Okay, that's it. That's it. Just leave her. Okay. Good night. Thank you, Getty.
Good night.
Good night, everybody is saying. Okay. So that is the reason, says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, for the terminology of the Torah. The Torah chooses a more lengthy phraseology in order to, instead of saying the word defiled, to say the word that's not kosher, right? That they're not pure. Instead of saying they are defiled. Okay.
Right.
So,
It's kinder.
what was
It's
that?
It's kinder.
It's softer.
To the animal
It's softer.
and also to people who hear it.
Exactly, it's softer. Like,
Softer.
imagine, I don't like to talk about things that are bad. I like to talk about things that are not so nice. They're not so good.
Okay,
Yeah.
the Greek lesson for tonight is it's called a euphemism.
Exactly. Yes, precisely. So-
So when you grow up in Brooklyn, that euphemisms are not well known.
Here's another way, okay? When growing up, we never said about anyone that we knew that had cancer, we never used that word.
Huh?
It was always, they had yene machla, in Yiddish we would say. They had that disease, the disease. We wouldn't say they, like, yeah, you don't like to say about somebody, that person has cancer. It's not a nice way of talking about somebody.
Yeah.
Anyways, okay. So where were we here? So now here comes the $1 million question. I just brought you guys somewhere else in the Torah where the Torah does use the word tameh, right? The Torah does use the word defiled.
Right.
So what's the deal? Sometimes yes and sometimes no, as the Rebbe asks. Phil, can you read for us?
This is extremely puzzling. The term tamei, or impure, can be found in the Torah more than 100 times. So wouldn't it be far more sensible for the Talmud to question this term that is repeated so many times?
Right? Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, hold on 1 second. Yeah, we're good. If somebody refrains from using crude speech one time, politicians are a great example of this, right? If somebody one time makes sure to say the right thing and speak the right way, but you've heard of them hundreds, because they're running for president or they're running for governor, whatever it is, but there are hundreds of tapes of them using that word. You know what I mean?
Or the bad word.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Imagine the N word for African Americans, right?
Yeah,
So a fellow gets up and he says, "I'm running for governor," and of course, no, I'm not racist, and I always speak beautifully and I speak politically correct and I say African American, etc., and the whole thing, right? And then 100 tapes come out of him that he uses the N word.
Yeah.
Not that I'm, heaven forbid, comparing the Torah to a politician, but that would come across as extremely disingenuous, right? So what's going on over here, right? So it turns out clearly the Torah is trying to teach us a lesson here as to how we should be talking and when we talk this way and when we talk that way. But what exactly that lesson is still a little bit of a mystery to us, right? Everybody with me here?
I'm with you.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about speech. Okay, specifically, let's talk about freedom of speech. I opened up a can of worms today on Facebook by asking my followers, for those of you that have Facebook and see it, you know what I'm talking about. I asked them, I said, I'm trying to figure this out. Does the Torah believe in freedom of speech? And it really opened up a real can of worms. What does freedom of speech even mean, etc.? Because in the modern world, we're accustomed that any democracy, if they even call themselves democracy, one of the most important things you got to have is freedom of speech, right? You got to be able to talk against the government if we want to keep the government in check.
It's fundamental.
Right? It's the first step. Then freedom of press, and then freedom of all the other things that come afterwards. The first step is you got to be able to speak, right?
Right.
But the truth is that the Torah, of course, the Torah gives us freedom to do whatever we want. But the Torah actually has very strict rules for us to speak. One way of looking at it is that instead of the Torah telling us we have rights to freedom of speech, the Torah tells us we have responsibilities to freedom of speech. In other words, you're given the freedom to be able to speak however you want, but you have the responsibility to keep that speech in check in certain ways. There's a few different things that we can bring as an example. Let's start with Lashon Hara. Right? Everybody's heard of Lashon Hara?
Yes.
Oh, this is the end of the question, right? So in some instances we have the word tummy, in some instances we don't. But let's learn a little bit about Lashon Hara, which comes from this verse in Vayikra. I think we're holding Marilyn. You want to read for us?
And you shall not wrong one man, his fellow Jew, and you shall not fear your God, for I am the Lord your God.
Okay, thank you. Without getting into all the details as to how we know it exactly from this verse, like every mitzvah, there's exact exegesis, exactly how it's learned out of the verse, and there's exact parameters for what Lashon Hara is, speaking about someone else. Any hurtful talk is verboten, even if it's true. And the Shulchan Aruch goes to great lengths to describe different forms of innocuous speech that we may or may not be able to use. Marilyn, you want to keep reading for us? Here are some examples of it.
Included in the prohibition
of ona'ah, which is the word that the Torah used in text 6. It said, "Velo tonu," you shall not wrong one man or his fellow. What does it mean to wrong a fellow? Included in this is
one who speaks of another matter which implies the shortcoming of his fellow. For example, if someone is asked a scholarly question, they should not say to one who is not versed in that field, "What do you respond here?" or "What is your opinion in this matter?" So it is with all similar instances that cause emotional pain, even though he is not embarrassing him outright at the moment, and he is not calling him names or embarrassing his fellow in public.
Now, by the way, I should mention that thank you, Marilyn. There's a lot of detail here. Okay, so, first of all, finish off, please. It goes without saying.
It goes without saying that one who ridicules another, even if he is only hinting, and even if it is the truth, this falls under the prohibition of wronging his fellow with words.
Okay, so this in general is called ona'ah or lashon hara, evil speech, negative speech, hurtful speech. And it goes into great detail, and there's a lot of discussion of what is hurtful speech and what isn't hurtful speech, because you leave things too ambiguous and Jews will find a way to hurt each other. That's just the way it is, unfortunately. So here he gives one, for instance, roundabout example. It sounds very respectful, right? Me and my friend are sitting. Someone asks us a question I know the answer to. And one way of showing off and making fun of my friend, putting my friend down, is to say to him, and I know he's not fluent in this topic, say to him, "So, Yankel, what do you have to say about this?" And embarrass him, put him on the spot and embarrass him in that way. Right? Of course, that's one roundabout way of Lashon Hara, speaking negatively about this person. Here's another example. For instance, you would think that calling somebody, praising somebody, saying, "You look gorgeous tonight," to a woman, or saying, or me talking to Arnold about Phil, right? I could say about Phil, Phil is a wise man, Phil is a great man, Phil is such a kind man. You would think that's not hurtful speech.
Hey, keep going.
Right, exactly. So you would think these are all amazing.
And then you'd ask me, and I'd give you my opinion.
Now, one second. So you would think these are all extremely positive things to say. How can that go into the category of hurtful speech? But the truth is that if I go over to Phil's biggest nemesis, arch nemesis, I don't know who it is, you know what I mean? And and I say to this arch nemesis, I say, Phil is such a great man, and Phil is such a kind man, etc. Speaking positively about somebody to someone that hates them only serves to fuel that hatred and that jealousy even more. So in that instance, it's hurtful speech because it's going to end up hurting Phil. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of laws about this in Shulchan Aruch and the Jewish Code about exactly how we're supposed to speak and how we shouldn't speak. Okay? This isn't to say nothing of lying. Marilyn, you're in the middle of reading for us. Why don't you finish off the laws about how we speak?
Distance yourself from a false matter.
So this is from a verse in Shemot. Yeah, go ahead.
And do not kill a truly innocent person or one who has been declared innocent, for I will not vindicate a guilty person.
Okay. Words, as we know, thank you, can kill. Right? The words that we say can have a tremendous effect on certainly on people's lives, but even on their livelihood. If we just drop, somebody's looking into buying a house, and a particular bank is going to give him a loan, and you just happen to drop a comment to that loan officer, not even something not true, just the wrong piece of information at the wrong time to get the man denied his loan, that can have a tremendous impact on somebody's life.
Yeah.
Right? Certainly lying, spreading evil slander about someone else, certainly forbidden, right?
Yeah.
Because the Torah has very specific ways that we are supposed to talk. Okay? So while modern society is super busy saying we got to be able to talk however we want, the Torah says, yes, you can talk however you want, but your talking has to come with feeling. There has to be compassion and sensitivity towards other people, which obviously ends up prohibiting things like lying or hurtful speech or things like that. Okay, great. Perfect. So now comes the $1 million question, right? We all know this. Is it the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Or is it, I only speak this truth except if it's sometimes not inconvenient, but for whatever reason. I tell a little white lie, or I just don't tell all the truth. So what do you guys think? This is a question for discussion. Let's discuss this for a second. What do you think? Are there ever opportunities at which you would say, oh, being truthful and not using hurtful speech, in this instance you could play with that a little bit?
No,
what would you say, Marilyn?
Truth, I would say truth can definitely be hurtful and
Okay.
could be a bad thing.
So in other words, we don't necessarily.
It doesn't matter. Truth isn't necessarily always good.
In other words, we don't necessarily ever need to lie, but we don't always need to say all the truth. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, or any of the truth at all.
That we just don't need to say it. This is not the place for it. No.
I mean, if a bride, you tell a bride that she looks beautiful.
Exactly.
Even if you don't think she is beautiful.
So,
you have to be, yeah. And
you
I
gotta
think
be
you're more
sensitive.
righteous, a better person for that.
So let's see this very interesting statement by.
I would say that compassion is more important than truth, or care. I would say, to be.
Well, you got to be
righteous
careful.
and kind is more.
You got to be
important.
careful, because where you're headed now is that sometimes you would tell somebody an untruth right now. I mean, you tell them a lie, which you think you're doing the biggest kindness to them. You're telling it to them now, and right now maybe it's making them feel good, but could be in the long run it's not, because they think that what you're saying is true. So we're starting to get into iffy waters here a little bit. Let's see how the Alter Rebbe puts it. Arnold, you want to read for us text 9?
There is a saying in the name of the Alter Rebbe: it is forbidden to utter falsehood. Truth, on the other hand, needn't always be broadcast and publicized from the roofs.
Thank you. So this is actually a very interesting part of Judaism, which is, for instance, rabbis. Okay, let's talk about rabbis, because you have one here that's lecturing to you now.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I have one. I have a little one that's lecturing to me right now. But let's talk about rabbis for a second. There are famously 4 volumes of the Shulchan Aruch. The Jewish Code of Law is split up into 4 volumes. When you get your rabbinic degree, in other words, when you get your smicha, your rabbinic ordination, one of the things they remind you is that even though you may have finished all 4 volumes of the Shulchan Aruch, you need to learn the 5th one on your own. Yeah. What's the 5th volume of Shulchan Aruch? Anybody know?
Life.
What?
Life?
Life is also a good one, but they say common sense.
Ah, okay.
Which I think is a very valuable thing. Here's an example of a story of this, okay? There's a popular story told about a rabbi who had a destitute pauper come over to him and ask him a halachic question. Before Passover, he asked him, Rabbi, are you allowed to use milk for the 4 cups of wine that we have to drink at the Seder? Right?
Yeah.
And the rabbi said to him, hold on one second, sorry. And the rabbi said to him, hold on, can you please step outside the room for a minute, and I'm going to, I'll call you back in a minute. The man stepped outside the room, and he came back in a minute later, and the rabbi had ready for him whatever it was, $150, whatever it was, in order that he should be able to have a proper Seder with wine. In other words, he was able to read between the lines. The question here, the more important thing on the table here was that the fact that the man wasn't able to to afford 4 cups of wine. Right? Forget the fact. It is a different question whether milk can or cannot be answered, and that can be a discussion. But this rabbi recognized that wasn't the thing on the table here. Yeah. The issue on the table here was that this man couldn't afford 4 cups of milk. By the way, I'll add that specifically when you want to become qualified in like more interpersonal parts of Jewish law, so think marriage and divorce, even though you learn the laws, you can't actually practice them until you have something we call shimush. Okay, the same thing with the laws of nida, whatever, all these different intricate laws, you have to have something called shimush, which means apprenticeship. So that's the point that Arnold was making about life. You got to have experience. You got to watch and learn how you deal with these things, and how is the proper way to deal with these things. It's not just all about what it says inside the book. So similarly, I think that we can take a lesson as every single person, not just a rabbi, that before we talk to someone else, maybe there's a few questions we can ask ourselves. Not just simply, is it true or is it untrue, but is this a truth that needs to be said now? Okay, so let's use an example. Does this truth, like the author says, does it need to be broadcasted? Does it need to be streamed to reach us right now? And you can ask yourself this in 3 ways. Number one, let's talk about the recipient, okay? Just the personality of the person you're speaking to. It might be true what you're saying now, but is this something the other person needs to hear right now? Okay? A lot of people in today's day and age, in today's society, would do well to learn this lesson before Thanksgiving. This Thanksgiving, there's going to be a lot of discord among families as people from 2 different sides of the aisle get together right after an election that's going to end terribly for half of the family members, no matter what. They're going to be very upset with the election results. Yeah. And one of the things we can learn is that maybe the person you're talking to right now doesn't need to hear what you're saying, even if you think it's true, and even if you think it's correct, and even if you think it's morally correct. Maybe the person you're talking to is not ready to hear it. Yeah. Or number 2, is now the right time to say it to them? You don't walk over to somebody who literally hasn't even buried their father yet, right? Their father just passed away, they haven't buried, and tell them, don't worry about it. Everybody gets over it. People die, and that's what happens. Right? You don't do that. You give them a hug. You say, I'm here for you, and I'm so sad, and your father was such an amazing person. And you keep saying that for 1 day, for 7 days, for 30 days, until eventually, you could talk to them 3 years later. You could talk to them, you could be talking about death as a whole. You can mention that, yes, that's the way of the world, and we all learn to move on, even if we miss our dear departed loved ones. Right? So even though what you're saying is true, it might not be the right person to say it to at this moment. It might not be the right time for them to hear them. And here's another really, really good one, which I think not enough people think about. Am I in the right position, the right frame of mind, or even the right person to be telling this to someone?
Correct.
Maybe I see a friend of mine who's suffering greatly, and they need to hear certain words, but maybe if they hear it from me, it comes across as condescending. Or maybe because I'm a rabbi, it comes across and makes them feel guilty. Or maybe because I'm a doctor, it makes them feel like they didn't give the right medical attention. Or whatever it is, based on who I am. Or maybe I'm just in a bad mood today. Maybe I didn't eat enough, so I cannot trust myself, right? I'm just hungry or tired or just not in a good frame of mind. So therefore the words, the way I'm going to say them, or I'm angry about something, therefore the way I'm going to say these words to someone else, these are sensitive words, I'm not going to be able to say them sensitively enough because I'm not in that kind of situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And this is what in English we call diplomacy, knowing when, who, and how to talk. Right?
Yeah.
Or let's use the other way of saying it, knowing when not to talk. Stephanie, you look like you're ready to read. Text 10 is from Pirkei Avot, which we've already learned. We already learned this Mishnah together. So Stephanie, at your leisure.
Okay, Rabbi Sheshan and son of, let me see if I can, Gamaliel would say, all my life I have been risen among the wise, and I have found nothing better for the body than silence. The essential thing is not sturdy, but deed. Sturdy, not deed. And one who speaks
study,
that's what it does. Study, but deed. Okay. And one who speaks exclusively brings on sin.
Okay. So says Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, all my life I've been studying all of these amazing teachings from the Torah, and I've not found anything better for the soul, for the body, other than silence. The ability, how does that song go? It was the sound, right, of silence, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes silence is really important, and it's important for us to recognize that there are times in our lives to be silent.
Okay, maybe I should be silent, but I feel like I should mention this.
Go ahead.
This Mark Twain quote. It is better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to say something and remove all doubt.
Remove all doubt. There you go. There you are. Yes, I've heard that Mark Twain quote. I try to live by it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Say that one more time.
Mark Twain used to say, "I would rather be silent and consider. I'd rather be silent and considered a fool than or be thought a fool than open my mouth and remove all doubt."
Good one.
What was that? Oh, you'll take her?
Like she's talking.
Want me to have her? She's hungry? Okay, Binanda. Okay. We're going to mommy. We're going to mommy. There you go. Okay. There's some things I just can't do, you know what I mean?
Oh, that's not his bottle or her bottle?
Too late now. She should have spoken up earlier. All right. But here comes the question. So we're talking all about sensitivity. We're talking all about that there's a crude way to speak. And there is a proper way to speak. And yet the Torah seems to be sending us a dual message. Sometimes I say tameh, impure. And sometimes I say the animals which are not pure, the opposite of pure.
Right.
Right? So when which? Okay? So here we get to the answer. If you use a broad brushstroke over the entire Torah without getting into too much detail, the Torah can be split into story and law. There are parts of the Torah that are stories, historical encounters, and then, right, such as this week's Torah portion, a lot of what's in this week's Torah portion is stories, historical relation. And then there are the legal parts of the Torah.
Right.
And that, my friends, is the difference. Let's read it first in the Rebbe's words. Phil, if you can, please, and then we'll unpack it. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm sorry, that was me?
Yeah, that's you.
Okay, sorry. The explanation. When dealing with language that comes in a halachic context, then the ruling must be verbalized in the clearest words, even if the words are of crude nature, so that the halachic decision will be crystal clear. Now we can understand what, excuse me. Now we can understand why, in the majority of cases, the Torah employs the term tamai. The benefit of brief language overrides using clean language. Only with regard to the stories is it fitting that impurity and the like should be written in a manner of a distorted verse.
Thank you. Says the Rebbe, this is the difference. Sometimes you have halacha in the Torah. You have Jewish law. When it comes to legal matters, you got to make sure you're crystal clear. You have no time for bending around the bend and saying things in a distorted way, and because it's going to be more PC, you cannot do that. You cannot do that. By way of example, Marilyn, if you can read for us, please, text 12. This is from a Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Teichtel, who was, he had a responsa, which means he answered halachic questions in his time. Go ahead.
Some halachic authorities have adopted a custom that when they issue a ruling about an animal rendering it treif, they are careful to use the polite term of "it is not kosher" to avoid uttering the term treif. I was asked if this is an appropriate custom. In my humble opinion, it is incorrect to do so, as it will lead to mistakes. Sometimes the inquirer may not hear the beginning of words, the words "it is not," and only hear the final word "kosher" alone, and they will assume it is kosher. The result is that they are misleading people with their rulings.
Thank you. Imagine for a moment, remember I told you towards the beginning of this lesson that when we were young, when we were younger, and even till today, if I hear about somebody that has cancer, we never called it cancer. We called it yene machle, that disease, the disease, because it was crude to talk that way about it and say that and put that label on somebody. It's not a nice thing to do, right? Imagine if you had a doctor that decided to start speaking that way. He has a patient, walks in, and he looks at his nurse and he goes, "Oh, this patient has that disease."
Yeah.
There's a lot of ambiguity here. The doctor has no license to do such a thing. This is not the moment for political correctness, right? You are a doctor. You got to be doing things exactly. You got to be talking in very clear words, clear communication to the nurses and to the other staff and to the other doctors, and even to yourself. You don't want to confuse yourself. It's got to be crystal clear, right? However, so when the Torah talks about legal matters such as which animals are kosher, which animals are not, the Torah says these are kosher, these are treif. These are kosher, these are not kosher. The Torah is not going to start saying, and these are the animals which are not pure. But when the Torah tells us a story, and one of the characters in that story are these unkosher animals, the Torah uses the term, those animals, asher einenu tahora, which are not tamei. Those which are not tamei. Now,
very good.
And here we get, so this answers our question, which is amazing. Yeah. Remember how this class, Wine and Wisdom, is all about getting a lesson, a life lesson, a way in life here. Yeah. So here's what I want to talk about. There's a lot of you that are sitting here, they're like, all right, Rabbi, a little nuance. Fine, I'll try from now on. Instead of saying the word bad, I'll say not good, unless I'm talking about something that's some sort of legal or instructional talk, and then I'll make it very clear to know that this is bad and this is good. Okay, great. But if I'm just talking about, the concept, I'll make sure to talk in a more refined way. My friends, it goes much deeper than that. The words that we use are not just words, but they actually frame the way we think about this concept. I'll give you an example. For instance, the Rebbe would never call a hospital in Hebrew a bet cholim. Okay, the word in Hebrew for a hospital is a bet cholim. Okay, a bet cholim literally means the house of the sick. Instead, the Rebbe would call it bet refuah, which means a house of healing. Now, are any of these terms incorrect? No. It's a house of sick. It's a building in which sick people go into, and in that building there is healing, and therefore it's a house of healing. Right? That is what a hospital is. That's the definition of a hospital. And that's why those terms are both correct in modern Hebrew. However, the Rebbe would be very careful to use the term bet refuah, the house of healing. Why? Because it's not just a nicer way of speaking about it. Imagine that you're talking to somebody who is sick, and they are coming in, and they're coming into this house. And you have a choice as to whether you're going to say this is a house of healing or this is a house of sick. Right? They should come in knowing that they're looking into a house of healing where they're coming in to be healed. Am I walking in? Is my attitude one of I'm coming in and being healed? Or is my attitude one where I'm coming in and I am sick and that's why I'm coming into this building? And it changes our whole perspective, the whole way of looking at it. Sorry, let me just take a look at my phone to make sure Rabbi Pinson wasn't supposed to, I don't think he's supposed to give a class tonight. I think he gives on Thursday night. He gives a little.
He has class on Tuesday night.
What was that?
He has the class on Tuesday night. The Talmud class is on Tuesday night.
He has a Talmud class on Tuesday night, correct? No, but he has a small thing that he does with somebody one-on-one. He uses this Zoom, but I think it's on Thursdays.
I see. Sorry, I didn't. I apologize. Okay. I will try to get to this later. I don't see any message from him, but I'll ask him and I'll apologize to him if he was supposed to use the classroom. I don't think he was. Okay.
Well, when would it be appropriate to say this is to say that a hospital is a bait?
Anytime you can. Anytime you can. How much better is that term? House of healing.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's refuah, but when would you say?
Whenever you're talking about it.
House of the sick.
My uncle is sick and he needs to go to the hospital. In Hebrew, you would say, "Hadod sheli choleh, or eneno magish betov, v'tzarich lalechet labet refuah." He needs to go to the house of healing. Yeah. There is no word hospital
in
Hebrew.
Why ever call the hospital
exactly
house of the sick?
Exactly. But in modern Hebrew, the most standard term to use is house of sick. That's just the term they use, bet cholim. Here's another example. I once heard this also about the Rebbe. I haven't verified it, but I believe I heard that it says so in one of his biographies. That the Rebbe would never use the term deadline. Instead, the Rebbe would use the term due date. They mean the same thing, let's be honest.
Right.
This has to be done by this date. It can either be a deadline or it can be a due date. But one of them connotes death and one of them connotes life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So which one do you want to, in which world do you want to live? By the way, the Rebbe is a great example of this. Okay?
Yeah.
Let's see this in the Rebbe's own words. Okay, this is a letter that the Rebbe writes to someone. Arnold, go ahead.
Okay, let me get this out of the way. I can't see it all because I have some things that I can't move right now.
Like the cameras?
Unless notices that are coming. Are you able to move it to my left?
I can't really move it. Not in this one. In this one, I can't really move it.
Yeah,
okay, that's okay. Phil, why don't you read for us?
Okay. With regard to Jewish retarded people, parenthetically, I prefer some such term as special people, not simply as a euphemism, but because it would more accurately reflect their situation, especially in view of the fact that in many cases, the retardation is limited to the capacity to absorb and assimilate knowledge, while in other areas they may be quite normal or even above average. The Jewish identity factor is even more important, not only per se, but also for its therapeutic value.
Thank you. You know, I'm blessed that there's no one in my family that has Asperger's or I'm sorry, the other one is slipping my mind right now. No, not schizophrenia. There's Asperger's, and I think the other one also starts with an A.
It's on autism.
Or autistic, right? I don't have anybody like that in my family. Autistic children or autistic adults or children with Asperger's. I mean, Asperger's also depends how mild they have it, etc. It's a very interesting concept. And the Rebbe would always be and the Rebbe, I'm sorry, there's just something going on. I just want to make sure it wasn't urgent. And the Rebbe would do this is, first of all, this is way before people were even calling these people special needs. But beyond even the term special needs, the Rebbe would call them special. The Rebbe would say, they're not regular. They're not the same as us. I get that. There has to be a separate word for them. They're different than us, but they're special. They're actually not retarded or below the mental capacity that they're supposed to have. In certain ways, they have a much deeper relationship. In certain ways, they're much deeper. First of all, we find this even mentally.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're very good at other mental activities that your average human being is not. But here's another powerful one. Like I said, I'm blessed not to have anybody with Asperger's or autism in my immediate family. But I know quite a few friends that have siblings who are. I've encountered them on many occasions. One in particular is one that went to the same bungalow colony as me for years, the same, in the Catskills. A boy by the name of Baruch Shnei Rechem. I should one day be able to have the same love in my relationship with the Torah as this boy had. What do I mean by that?
Yeah.
The passion that you would see in the way that he would kiss the Torah, the way he loves the Torah. For his bar mitzvah, his parents got him like a fake Torah, of course, in order that he shouldn't disrespect. And an Aron Kodesh, like a little ark for the Torah. And the relationship that he had with the Torah was like one that I can never hope to have in my life. I don't know what's going on there inside his soul, but it's obviously something much deeper than the way that I, with all of my regular mental capacities, relate with God. And the Rebbe saw this, the Rebbe said, that's why it's important, the words. So you say to yourself, what's the big deal? So we call him retarded, and we'll call him retarded, and he'll still have that relationship with God. The words that we use, the attitude with which we approach these things changes the reality of them. That's extremely, extremely important to understand. Let's end off with one more story in this regard. In the summer of 1976, there was a large group of IDF veterans who were in New York. They came with one of these organizations, and they came to spend time by the Rebbe. Here's a picture of it. You see them. They're wounded IDF soldiers, veterans, and many of them were in wheelchairs. They had been, they were on the front lines. Israel fights a lot of wars. And they brought them in, and they called them the Nechei Tzahal, which means the disabled from among the Tzahal, from among the IDF. And they brought them into 770. They cleared out the whole room. They brought them all in. They made a special space. They should all be able to be there. And then the Rebbe came in to address them. The Rebbe opened his talk by saying, I don't like that this group, as a group, is being labeled the disabled from among the Tzahal. Instead, I think we should call them Mitsuyanei Tzahal, which means the exceptional of the Tzahal. Because think about it. These are the people who gave up so much of themselves. They've done so much more for the Jewish people than many other people. They should be called exceptional, not disabled.
Yeah.
This was the story. Now, there's a man whose name is Joseph Kabilav, or Kabila. I don't know exactly how you pronounce his name. He was a soldier, and he had both legs amputated. And he was at this meeting. And he describes in an interview, at the end of this meeting, each soldier received $1 with parting words from the Rebbe. And that to him, the Rebbe said, thank you. Like we say thank you for your service to many people. The Rebbe opens up the talk by saying these are the exceptional soldiers. And then the Rebbe looked at him and asked the Rebbe, gave him the $1. Instead of him saying thank you, the Rebbe said thank you to him. In his words, and I quote, he said, somehow the Rebbe sensed that was exactly what I needed to hear. With those 2 words, the Rebbe erased all the bitterness and despair that had accumulated in my heart. He says, I carried the Rebbe's thank you back to Israel, and I carry it with me to this day. Words, my friends. We're not talking here about actions. We're not talking about something the Rebbe did, something the Rebbe, words. By the Rebbe using specific words and not using other words, the Rebbe was able to shift the entire perspective that this man had, not only that the Rebbe had towards him, but that he had of himself, and he carries that thank you with him till today. Imagine if instead of that, the Rebbe would have spoken on how you're disabled, and therefore you should take it easy, and I don't know, whatever. There could have been all sorts of other speeches. There would have been nice, beautiful speeches speaking about how they're disabled. Instead, the Rebbe chose to flip the whole story on its head. The tongue is the only limb in the entire body that has 2 gatekeepers. Right? 2 lips.
The lips, yeah.
Sometimes we close it, sometimes we open it, and sometimes we should speak, and sometimes we shouldn't speak. So, sometimes we should speak, but we should wait before we speak and think about how we're going to speak and what we're going to say. And I think that if there's any lesson that we can have, there's many lessons to be had from this week's Torah portion. Last year, we also learned Parashat Noach, and I don't remember the exact lesson that we took from the Torah portion last year.
I remember we were talking about different levels of righteousness.
Okay. That's amazing. Amazing you remember that. And there's lots of different lessons to be had in Parashat Noach. But here we have a lesson that can be taken from 3 extra words or 8 extra letters in Parashat Noach.
Yeah.
The words that we say not only have a powerful impact on other people, not only can kill or give life, right? Take away or give life, but the words that we say can actually help people to shift their perspective, can help ourselves to shift our perspective, the way we look at things, and help us to be better human beings. It starts with speech, and yes, we do have this freedom to speak however we want, but we should also have the responsibility to recognize that we don't speak however we want. We speak with sensitivity, we speak with compassion, and we speak to other people as human beings. Hopefully, with every word that we say, we help to make this world and other people around us and ourselves into a better place. L'chaim. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
You got it.